and I live in a temporary use project in Forêt, where I live, and I co-manage the project that is happening there. I have been asked to moderate this speech today, so I'm here for this and to guide a bit the time, because we don't have much time. The panel talk today is within the frame of the European Lab, which is happening for 3 or 4 days. And just for everybody to know, this discussion is streamed live over the internet. And if you want, it's available afterwards still at the European Lab's Facebook and YouTube channels. So to the topic, a new era in temporary occupation. 15 years ago, the use of empty space was generally automatically connected to illegal squatting. Then over the past 10 years, a new practice has started to emerge. Temporary use started to become legally, politically, and socially accepted practice and form of occupying buildings. And in only 10 days, we're going to launch STAN. STAN stands for Social Temporary Use Network, and it's a network, an international network that will gather European associations, organizations, and structures that are active within social temporary use. With all this in mind, and all this development and movement, is it possible to say that we are already in a new era for temporary use? And for this, we have 4 guests here today, very exciting guests, if I may say. And I'm going to start with, on my left side, we have Max. I'm just going to take my notes. Maxime Said, he's a co-founder of Commune, a Brussels-based social temporary use platform who aim to transform empty buildings into urban commons. They've been active since 2003, and they're just getting more and more active. Maxime has a background in law, and he currently coordinates the temporary occupation, the Tripostal, which is at the Gare de Midi in Saint-Gilles. Then next to Max, we have Jan Verhegen, who is member of the cabinet of the State Secretary Pascal Smet, who was coming today, but he had to excuse himself. Pascal Smet is the Brussels State Secretary for Urbanism since this July, and before this, in the previous government, he was the Minister of Mobility and Civil Engineering in Brussels. And we believe, that temporary occupation is within his realms of action, and this is why Jan, representing Pascal Smet, is a perfect invitee to sit here today with us. Then next to Jan, we have Hanne van Reusel, who has done her PhD at the Faculty of Architecture here in Brussels, that belongs to KU Leuven. And her PhD was related to temporary use. She is now part of the collective Josaphaire, and Josaphaire run a temporary use project in the wasteland of the Parc Josaphat in Schaerbeek. Yeah, just the wasteland. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And right at the edge, we have Marcis Rubenis, who has flown in from Riga. And he's a co-founder of an association over there that's called Free Riga. And it's a platform for organizing social temporary use in vacant buildings. And they as well have been active since 2003. Marcis manages one of their quarters where he also lives. And he's also responsible for finance and for any kind of owner relationships. And now I'm going to pass the microphone to our first speaker.
Thank you. Just need to make sure this works. Yep. Do you want me to click it? No, it's fine, I will do it. Hello, everyone. So we have vacant offices, abandoned factories and churches, empty houses, even social housing units. And if we put them all together, we reach a total of 6.5 million square meters of empty buildings here in Brussels. So 6.5 million square meters, that sounds like a lot, right? But it's not so obvious what it is. So just to give you an idea, it is the size of the municipality of Ixelles. So for the one who don't like Ixelles or don't know Ixelles, it's 2 times Saint-Gilles. So wow, sounds like big. So I have an announcement for people here in Beaux-Arts this afternoon with us. In Brussels, we do not have 19, but rather 20 municipalities. Woo! So the 20th municipality is the one composed by all the vacant slot and empty places in this city. So this is actually totally crazy, right? I think it's even more crazy when we consider the fact that people are still sleeping outside, that people are queuing sometimes for about 10 years to get access to social housing. And I'm not even speaking about the people who are just looking for a space decent and cheap to work or to do some art. So that's exactly why in 2013, we've created Commune. The idea was to transform these empty places into community places, which would be functioning like urban commons and open to the neighborhood. So basically, we call that temporary use. So the idea is just to use this building when it is empty and give it a purpose for a while. So it's like kind of a triple win-win, we say. So first, it's a win, of course, for the people who can use the space, because they have access to something cheap and decent to live or to create. It's also a win for the neighbors, because they used to have a neighborhood with abandoned, creepy buildings, and now it's all alive. And then it's also a win for the owner, because his place would be empty for a while, cost money, energy, time, and now it is occupied, alive, maintained, assured, secured by a community. So we've been doing that for a certain while, and we call this practice social temporary use. Why do we call it social? Because the main purpose of that is to serve the common good and the general interest. The temporary use is there to provide space to create and to live. So that's a great idea, right? Many people are doing this. We did not invent anything. There are many actors doing that. But also some people start thinking, wow, that's also a great business there, maybe. There's a niche. There's something we can use. And so some companies, often private and for-profit, sometimes multinationals, they come from abroad and they call themselves anti-squat. So now they don't call themselves like this anymore so often because it's not so sexy, actually, when we think about this. Their main purpose is to maximize profit, and so that's why they would use space. They use the same tool, temporary use, the same tool that we use, but in a totally, radically different vision. So this has many impacts. The first one would be that there is up to, I would say, 0 social added value to the temporary use. So let's say in an empty building we can do a lot of things, but we can also organize a défilé for Prada or Dior in the basement, and it's exciting, right? Or we can also sell super expensive beer in a popular neighborhood, but then there is no added value for the neighborhood. And the other one, maybe worse, would be the rights of the tenant. So basically in such places, with the practices of these companies, people can be kicked out within 48 hours. You take your stuff, you get the fuck out. Also, a manager can come at any time and check how you live, because you're not really a real tenant, right? Mothers with children cannot live in such places, because that would be hard to kick them out, maybe. So they prefer not to allow them. So basically, here we have something that we cannot accept in a way. And knowing that, we gave ourselves a mission. In Commune, the idea was to bring back life in these empty spaces of the 20th municipality and turn them into citizen lab organized by and for the citizen. So we've been doing that for a little while. It grew, and now it's a non-profit organization with about 10 workers, 10 currently occupied buildings, a bit more than 50 inhabitants, 100 projects that are hosted in these places all around Brussels. There's also the question of network. We'll talk about it later, I guess. And with the time, we get some institutional recognition also doing this work in Brussels, in Belgium, also in Europe slowly, with our partners, I hope. But that's not really what matters here. Beside the work that is done on a daily basis, I think what we're trying to do is to demonstrate that the city can be totally different. What we're trying to do, building after building and temporary use after temporary use, square meter by square meter within that huge 20th municipality, is to make a proof of concept that we're able now to build a city where everybody feels included, where we can live public space differently, where a new economy can be tried out, where new practice can live and flourish all around. So about that question of a new era of temporary use, the idea is to say that yes, we believe it is possible for it to come now, but for that we will need the support of every citizen to help the 20 municipality to survive. We will need the help of the public authority to support and also to protect that 20th municipality from this market-based approach, that extractive approach that I've mentioned before. In Comuna, we believe that the transition is already there. We believe that us and many other stakeholders are already doing it on the ground. There's also a brand new government with big ideals. And so the question now is to say, are we going to be able to actually make this transition right now? And I believe yes. I really wonder what's your opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to again excuse the State Ministry, who would love to be here, but unfortunately this was not possible. And to immediately relate to what you just said, I think the fact that Pascal Smet wanted to be here is indeed a first sign that your demand is something that we want to take really serious, and that is one of the on the forefront of our policies. If so, we will, of course, mostly speak. Pascal Smet is responsible for urbanism, so we are more responsible for the legislative part of temporary use, whereas temporary use, I think, is a general responsibility of the whole government and all the government bodies. That's why it's also very present in the government declaration. And so, from our point of view, I think it's first very important to stress that every use of a building is in a way temporary. So if we make, if later we make the relation with legislative measures we have to take or we can take, it will always, a first question is, okay, what is temporary? Is temporary 6 months? Is temporary 2 years? Is 5 years still temporary? It's something important to take in mind. As you already stressed in your contribution, we come from an era where temporary use in Brussels was completely absent, where buildings were completely left falling apart, falling into pieces. And I think if we look at the things positively, indeed, over the last years, we already saw a lot of initiatives, and I think with different angles. You have, for instance, your initiative, the Common Josaphat, where it's more about experimenting how to reappropriate a site. There's your initiative around Tripostal, where I think it's a lot about installing a temporary use to engage the neighborhood in a large development project. You also see private initiatives, not maybe the private initiatives you were talking about, but private developers who own buildings that go in, through a big transformation process, and where you see a dynamic between the private sector and associations and also the architects to use temporary occupation to more like to make like a pre-configuration of what the future project can be. I'm making allusion to the project of the World Trade Center in the north area. And I think that's very interesting, relating to your presentation of the 20th commune. There is 6.5 million square meters available of inoccupied real estate for temporary use. So one of the main lines in our policy will also be that this shouldn't be something of private initiatives against associative initiatives. I think there is space enough for everybody, and our role as a government will be to streamline this, to also promote temporary use, in order that in every situation, everybody and every initiative can have the right chance. So if I then go on to what the policy will be, so first of all, this government and our state secretary wants to promote temporary use more than it has already been. So we are in charge of all the development project, all the building permit, all the projects which needs building permits. So first thing is to make people conscient about the idea, because some are already conscient, some are not yet conscient. Then there is, and this will be a collaboration between our state secretary and the other members of the government. There is the proposal in the policy declaration of a counter for temporary use. This counter will have like two sides. First of all is to make a up-to-date register, a continuously up-to-date register of spaces which are available for temporary use, in order that initiatives who are looking for spaces can easily find opportunities. The other part of the counter, and that's more our side of the counter, is more the aid with two initiators on the permit question, because in every, or in almost every project of temporary use, there will always be some permit issues, because it's not because things are temporary that they don't have to be regulated. Then also the government declaration stresses a lot on the fact that in all public projects, and there are a lot of public projects which will become concrete over the next 3, 4, 5 years, temporary use should first of all be open to not-for-profit initiatives and social initiatives, initiatives that relate the projects to their neighborhoods around. And last point is, so we will take some legislative initiatives also around temporary use. So one of the big legislative projects of this government is the minimum importance. So all the interventions in buildings or on sites which don't need a permit, or we only need a small permit, and this is more than just temporary use, but temporary use will be one of the axes around we will work. And yeah, that's our contribution for the next years.
Thank you. I'm really happy to hear the link being connected to the big development projects that are also really at stake here in Brussels. I'm going to take a bit more the position of my background as an architect and a researcher, although I'm also partly a practitioner. My research has been a design-based participatory action research. That's a mouthful to actually say that I've been doing academic research while literally having my feet in the Josaphat mud and looking together with citizens what temporary use, or rather transitory use, can mean for our city and for the discipline of architecture. And one of the reasons why I started with the subject, or why I'm so engaged with it, is that I, as an architect, but also as a citizen of Brussels, as a human being, I am frustrated with some of the neoliberal mechanisms that are at stake in urban development, in our city, in Brussels, the place where at the end of the day we live, we be, we are. And we see more and more actually how market mechanisms are taking over, making that some people can't afford to have a roof above their house, while, as Maxime nicely addressed, some buildings are just being empty, sometimes because of technical issues, administrative issues, but often also because of speculation, developers waiting for better times to develop their area. And as such, as architect, researcher, Brussels citizen, I've been looking for how can we actually build our living everyday environment and look for the best quality of being together, and that's where the concept of the urban commons has come in. Maxime also referred to it. I don't know in how far everyone is familiar with it. I'm going to try to be short in the definition, but in generally, in the scene of the urban commons in academia, but I think also in practice, it relates to this idea that we have private actors, we have public actors, but there is also a third way possible, and that is citizens working together, claiming their right to a certain resource, but also taking responsibility for that certain resource, and making sure it will sustain and everyone can benefit of it. A nice example of this could be clean air, which is also a good issue for Brussels. It can be knowledge. Wikipedia is an interesting example of how knowledge can be taken care of by a community. And so more and more people are looking to adapt this concept also to the urban environment. Because although commons is an old concept that has been actually very natural before the industrialization, today it has been highly privatized, and we've been highly arriving to a dynamic of public or private. So how would this be contextualized in an urban context then? And there are some nice existing examples. I think the nicest one we have in Brussels is the community land trust, where actually housing development is taken out of market mechanisms. I'm not going to go in detail, but the idea is that the ground of the area remains shared, and so no speculation mechanisms can happen anymore, and it's about having affordable housing on the long term. And so based on this idea of the commons and the potential it has to find an alternative for a system that is running into multiple crises, the collective of Common Josaphat has come together. And Commons Josaphat has been a platform of engaged citizens who saw all these issues and all this potential, and were like, how can we make this concrete and how can we develop that? And so they looked at the Josaphat site, not a park, but a nearby 24 hectares big urban wasteland, which is owned by the region and which will be developed in a new neighborhood of 1,800, I think by now 1,600 housing units. So this is going to be a big share of the 20th commune going to the two other communes, Schaerbeek and Yver. And so the question is okay, we basically almost have an empty land, and how can we then, if we have all of this possibility, because it's regionally owned, it's in hands of a public actor, which we assume is more in interest of its citizens than in gaining profit, how can we actually make this into an ideal, sustainable neighborhood for Brussels? And a lot of great ideas have emerged from that. There is a booklet published, 40 pages. It can be found on the website of Common Josaphat. But there was also frustration, because that's a really nice idea. We've done studies to prove that financially this all can be possible, but what does that mean in the everyday? What does that mean today? And so that's the moment that with a couple of citizens, we started to occupy the Josaphat land, or a part of it, because 24 hectares would be a bit ambitious. And it started with a community garden, with a mobile kitchen. And later on, we have been adding out a house. But it's not just a garden, a kitchen, a house. Huistuin en keuken, voor degenen die Nederlandstalig zijn. These everyday interventions, all of them had a great vision behind them, or an ambition or principles. It's not just a community garden, it's being able to produce your own food in the city, touching nature, having your hands in the ground, and deciding about how to manage that together, how to take your responsibilities together. The kitchen is using food leftovers that we recuperate. It's about being careful with our resources and then sharing them at a prix libre, at a free donation price, to be more social and show other economic models are possible. The house that we are building is not just a house. It's actually almost one person building it on its own, by hand, of recuperated materials, to show that actually we could make our own houses at like €400 price, and we would be free of this pressure to work hard and long hours in order to be able to just have a roof above our heads. And so it's based on these everyday experiences, these citizens really working hard and struggling to work together, that we have been engaging in this temporary use. Temporary use, which by now we managed to also find a relation with the public owner/developer of the area, the SAU, and in which we're also looking for how can this sustain in the long term, because that at the initial base was the clue. And that's why I like to talk more about, let's call it self-proclaimed transitory use, because as you nicely mentioned, everything is temporary in a way, but every temporary activity also leaves a trace and can become transitory or change things. So just one simple garden can mean a lot for people in their everyday life, but it can also show that citizens can take responsibilities, that citizens are looking for other ways to take care of their public and green spaces. And so in that sense, I think it's really important, linked also to the bigger urban development projects, to really take care of what do we put behind this temporary use, what is the vision behind it. And we can see how now in the region, increasingly more of the organizations of the region or the municipalities are engaging with temporary use. The question is, what do we want to develop in that temporary use? What kind of dynamic do we look to create? And how do we deal that? How do we foster it? Or how do we get it in a certain vision?
Okay, guys. I was gonna basically start telling about what Free Riga is. I'm from Riga, but then Max told it kind of all. Just substitute commune was Free Riga, and the story is there. So we're also the 20th commune in Riga. There's huge amount of empty spaces. I didn't know that, but actually commune is using the same win-win-win idea. So, I mean, I understood that I maybe could define myself as 29th European state, representing 29th European state in a sense that there's a whole generation of organizations currently that happily we discovered together with these guys, started discovering a year ago, who have the same identity, the same genes, the same DNA, who are kind of not this confrontation type of squatting based, but are rather market based. How can we use the market to access the empty spaces? At the same time, they have the social as their aim. So this commons or social economy, or call it as you want. There are hundreds of ways how to say it. And that have been born around 2013. So I'm one of them, but about Riga specifically, it'll be fine. About Riga specifically, the interesting maybe perspective that Riga is shedding. So Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, the Baltic countries, are the post-Soviet spaces, you know, and we have been experiencing extreme of the neoliberalism in many senses, because from collectivism, forced collectivism that everybody kind of, didn't want anymore and it wasn't working, lies, empire of lies, we went into a very high individualism. And therefore also market forces, therefore there are these, we have counted around 500 empty buildings in the historical center of Riga. There are probably 1,000. So it's basically the market which is not working. Economics, the free market is not working. It's squeezing out the life of the city. And especially in our context, which also differs from here, we don't have so much municipal support, state support, because there's less money and there's less, let's say, institutional capacity and understanding how to involve yourself with social and economical processes. So that's quite extreme in the other places of, especially Eastern Europe, which is not this region. But what did you? Oh, okay, no, it's fine. To tell you shortly, you heard we're also a platform for coordinating and helping with social temporary use. We have had many spaces. We started, maybe, which is also a little DNA thing, we started with this little Occupy Me sticker. There were 5,000 stickers printed out during a festival, arts festival, when many organizations came around this frustration that Riga was European capital in 2014, European cultural capital. But in 2013, we had the feeling that there is no space for culture. So that's the squeezing out of the life of the city. So culture doesn't have the space in the European capital of culture. How comes? We have also nice spaces. This is all what Max told. This is the quarter that I'm managing. Last idea, 200 years old buildings. Some Soviet buildings. We have more this hipster, trendy, contemporary arts and culture destination quarter. It was created in 1 year. All this is like 1 year. So actually owner invited us there in this quarter, large in the city center, abandoned sanitary transportation base where they repaired emergency cars and so on. Owner invited us to co-develop it, basically to pre-design, as you mentioned. Owners are interested in social temporary use to give life to the spaces. This is another little lesson for us. But basically what I want to say that, this is this generational idea that in Europe, in whole Europe, there's a whole generation of similar organizations which are using market mechanisms to enter the spaces, to somehow get access to the spaces that have been taken away from people. And I come from Eastern Europe. I'm not a communist at all. Not at all, but I really like market mechanisms, but I see everywhere people try to use this market to enter the spaces, to incubate some kind of capacity and ability, and examples show how much it's necessary, especially in Eastern Europe where people are just going away. We are declining. Riga is declining as a city, and Eastern Europe is as a whole declining, which can also happen here at some point. And without space as a human right for social activities, and community as a human right, these regions will be dead. And I think this is something that everybody is feeling, that we have to find a way how to get to the space in a temporary way, but then, which is my maybe bigger idea from this presentation, what I thought, is how to acquire these spaces for long term. Is it through crowdfunding? Is it through land trusts? Is it through using like WeWork, but stealing it for maybe really social ideals? Not WeWork is social, it's very social, but it's not. It's this biggest co-working space network that there is. Having IPO, initial public offering, getting money from the stock market, whatever ways, how to turn these empty spaces which are not working, signs of not working market, how to turn them in permanent social spaces. I think from these organizations that is our generation, we are looking forward to have a new institution, like heritage protection in 19th century. It was just amateurs, just lovers doing it. I think we are these lovers now all over Europe, and Stan, this camp in Paris that's happening in 5 days, it gathers currently, I think, 8 organizations, which are the founders, but it will have more. I think we will be we're trying to be the new institution that will take back spaces so that they not just serve, like Tallinn's quote that I showed you, that we just add value and go away, but we add value and we can stay in part of the space, in whole space, buy it whole, I don't know, but somehow keep it social. So I think that there is a contradiction actually between market. I would gladly invite you to Riga, maybe there it's more extreme. There is a contradiction between market and between social aims, social ideals. How to regulate that, I don't know yet. I think one thing that's really necessary is support these social platforms so that they can acquire, not are subsidized all the time, but are subsidized maybe in the beginning to acquire the space and take it out of the market. And maybe having less regulation is also a way, because everybody says no, as Nantes, people from Nantes City Council, they had this famous saying that, you know, when you come with temporary use somewhere, they said, everybody says no, you know, because it's temporary, what it is, like what's the regulation, what's the use of this building, function, tra-la, tra-la, fair safety, you can imagine. So maybe less regulation, some kind of launch pad for organizations that want to take over the spaces with criteria of being social. That's that I would like to propose in this discussion.
Perfect. Marcis, because I want to launch this conversation. If you can now all, you have 3 microphones to share with each other. I would like to launch this. We have 4 microphones, perfect. Ça marche, ça marche. Good. Perfect.
We can talk all at the same time.
Because my first question is exactly, you're talking about social. We seem to quite agree on social. What is social? How do we measure it? Do we want to measure it? How extreme do we go? Just everything together? What does it mean? Like, for example, when you talk about communal buildings, do they have to mandatorily be for social use? If so, what's the percentage of social? Are we not allowed to make any money in a building like this? And so on. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I can start. Maybe does it work? Yes? Cool. Great. I have a microphone. Yeah, no trust. Maybe the idea would be not to reinvent everything. So I believe so if we want to use space and perhaps develop more culture, as Marcit said, and to make sure that the city will stay alive, because I think that's really what we're talking about. We also would need a balance. So at least what we try to create is not spaces that are 100% subsidized and that culture should be decided by a public authority within these empty space and just use them and subsidize everything. I think the idea would be also to find economical models and balance which are based also on certain criteria and ethics. And so basically just not to reinvent everything. There's something called social and solidarity economy. It exists. They have criteria. It's called MS. And so basically the idea is that we're having economical activities, but that the main purpose is not to make profit. You need a balance. You need to be able to pay the people who are working. You need to be able to pay the insurance. You need to be able to pay the taxes. But the point is not to generate profit for shareholders, and that would be the only goal. So I think this is one simple criteria to start with. There's also the question of the governance. So within these social and solidarity economy, the idea is that everyone who works there has a word to say, just like in a cooperative, where it would be one person, one vote, and that would be a way to also put criteria on what is done there. And I think that the main purpose should be to generate social and to generate culture and not to generate money. Money is a way to make sure that it can run on the long term. I think that would be part of the answer for us, at least.
Yeah, I think indeed, I don't think we should now lose our time with discussing like le genre des anges, what is social, what is not social. we think that as a government, we have multiple tasks in that sense. It's first of all support organisms that have a more social approach to and not-for-profit approach to temporary occupation, but that's more the support to the organization. That's not yet related to a specific project. Then on a project level, I think it's specifically when it's about sites or buildings that are owned by the government has a role to play in defining, okay, if we are doing a temporary use project here, what are our objectives here? And objectives can be multiple. Objectives can be about pre-configuration. Objectives can be about accommodating needs that are urgent. I think a perfect example that I didn't mention in my introduction is the temporary occupation organized by CityDev for refugee accommodation. So it's also a role of the government of thinking, okay, we have a very urgent need here. Which are our options on temporary occupation to help these initiatives? And thirdly, I think we also have to make a difference in temporary use projects between the organizational part of the temporary use, where we have to make sure, and I think it's indeed a very thin line and a difficult debate, but where we have to make sure that things are done in a correct way, that legislation, and we are the first to try to make legislation as simple as possible, and that I think it's in the interest of both public and social and private players in this field to make that legislation is simplified. So there is, first of all, there's the organizational part of temporary occupation, and on the other hand, there is the content, what we are going to do. And these two things don't necessarily have to coincide in each project and on each site. I think, for instance, in big sites, you can say, okay, there is one party, be it a more social party or be it semi-private party, who is in charge of the logistics of the temporary occupation, and then there are different other parties more in charge of developing a specific project that's responding to the ambitions that are formulated by the initiator or by the needs of the neighborhoods and the public network around it. And I think the global ambition has to be that we work to make coincide all these factors. So I really strongly believe that with this 20th commune, there is really enough food for everybody. And I think if we really push this even more forward, this temporary occupation, it's not a win-win-win, but I think it's a win-win-win-win.
Wow.
Maybe also linked to this aspect, and I think there the government has a really interesting role, because just the government, I don't know how much % of the 20th commune is actually like already belonging to the public, like as to say, and I also think there is like a great potential, because if calls are being launched to manage or organize temporary use, the calls tend to go for the lowest price. So there are other ways to deal with this, like setting the price and looking for the best content of the city for the neighborhood. And there are like really simple ways that you can tweak some of the existing instruments to facilitate more social uses.
Yeah, and I think this has been done specifically for the example of the Tripostal, so the Gare de Midi, which is like this huge building. And in their call to project, they specified that it should, like they put conditions to make sure that this would stay like it would stay a social temporary use. And so they've done it already, and now I think it's a question of making it global and make sure that's the way it works. Maybe just, I would like to add, because I think it's tempting to say, oh, everyone can do it all together, there is enough for everyone, and like, in a way I agree. I also think we can consider empty spaces as something specific. It is out of market indeed. So there is, I think it has also a function of a lab. And we're now talking, and this new government specifically, but it has been said for a while that we need a transition, right? Also an economical transition. And so we need to try out things. We need a lot of experimentation. I think we've been experimenting quite a lot so far. We always need to experiment more, but I think it's also time to really give means and to go for it. And if we say, oh, we can subsidize social activities by promoting for-profit activities next to it, I think we're circulating in the same, we're just doing over and over, staying in the same system and managing on this one to save some money. I believe it is time really for social economy to work by itself with support of the public authority in some manners. And I think these huge sites that you mentioned, they can work run by these organizations. That's the example I think that we mention very often in this world. In Paris, there is the Les Grands Voisins. The three organizations who are running the place are three non-profits organizations. And they managed to create something that is, I think, much more exciting than what we've seen in many places of huge sites that are open with a bar, etc. So there is ways to make social activities within the social economy world with an amazing result. And I think that should be the priority within these empty buildings for the region, which promotes new economical models. This is where we should try them out. It's much cheaper than doing it in billions of dollars building. So let's do this.
I would just like to know, talking about the 20th commune and about exactly all the things that you believe in and that you want to promote, where are we at? What is the situation today here in Brussels, but also in Riga? Are there any legislations already in place? What are the projects that exist? Where are you going? What are you pushing for? And so on. What are you working on right now?
Well, we are still in the beginning of the legislative period, so we are still preparing what we are working on. So, as I already mentioned, I think indeed today about this 20th commune, it's a very global number, 6.5 million square meters. But indeed, I don't think we today exactly need know where is what available. So this is the first thing that the government has to put in place, is like a continuously up-to-date inventory and also a proactive inventory, because it's also thinking, okay, we know that this and this and this and this project is coming, is going to happen. So this inventory needs a little bit of imagination, so to say. So in order to know exactly when there are demands that they can be answered. And so the legislative part about the permits, I think I already noticed that one of the priority legislative projects of the government is this arrêté de minime importance. It's much larger than this, but temporary, we have to take into account temporary use as a very important factor. And in the next months and weeks, we will have several meetings with organizations like Communa, but also others who have an experience in the field, so that we can also nourish ourselves on the content, on what we have to change. And then a third thing, which I forgot in my introduction, that's why I was a bit hesitating in the end, but now it's coming back. And it's something on which we don't yet have the right answer. But so we are in charge of permits. So we also worked a lot with the profit guys, the developers, who also come to see us and say, we have a lot of troubles with these projects because we go to see administration X and then we go to see administration Y, and then we see the de bouwmeester, maître architect, and they all say something different, and then we go into the permit process, and then there is neighborhood protest, and then the politicians start to change also their opinion about the project, which is, of course, a very natural thing, I think, and I think it's something where one of the things we want to work on is coherence in building projects and in the public instruction of building permits, which doesn't mean that we also always have to stick to our first opinion, but that's something in which I think for part of it, temporary use can play its role. And some private parties, not all of them, but some private parties are open to the idea that if you use temporary occupation as part of a participative approach in the start of your project, you can, not in an absolute way, but you can to some extent limit the potential danger of a project that starts to, I don't know how you say this in English, zwalpen, pendle between opinions of, and so that's something. So the right place of participation in the elaboration of a building project, be it a public building project, but also be it a private building project, that's something on which we really want to improve. I think it's something in which perfection will never exist, but it's something in which we really want to improve, and that's something where temporary use can certainly play its role.
Okay, if I can react on it, I'm really happy to hear so. And I think also this concept of like building permits, trust, rules, it's been also addressed, like all of a sudden you have to fit with regulations, and I can see how that is a very big blockage for a lot of people who just want to try out something, and all of a sudden they first of all have to find the owner of the site and which administration within Brussels is, and there are people working on helping to facilitate this process. But I think it's also part of the public actors having trust and taking risks and maybe just allowing for things to happen faster, and not wait to have everything in control and to know what to expect from it, but just exactly this aspect of like we're experimenting something new or innovating, and if we want to change things in our system that we see that are not working, it is time to create an open freedom space within that system. And I think there, for example, in France, they're working on the permis de faire, so like a building permit for doing things, actually, for experimenting. And there also it will be really crucial, as you mentioned, to have a framework that is really clear about in which cases can we allow openness, so it doesn't get for people realizing housing in more precarious conditions, but it is really for allowing people that are looking for long-term solutions.
Two ideas also, listening to what you all said. One is maybe more to both for the market solutions and about permits and also social. I see here we have some urbex experts in this audience, and we will gladly probably could provide you with some cases, but Bremen has interesting case of they have a temporary permit that is for up to 2 years, easier with fire regulations, like in a sense that it guarantees fire safety, but it's not the same amount of investment required as if that would be a permanent 20-year renovation with 20 million budget. You know, it's just deals with the fire security and with maybe access to the space for organizing events, making it easier. That's one idea that I thought listening to you. And the other one is an example of Riga, which is also in one of the urbex projects. It's one of the cases. It's about and that more addresses how to facilitate social use of these spaces, which is easy then for the city and for municipalities as such, and that's property tax reductions. I don't know how this regime works here, but I know that in London, in England, they have something similar, tax exemption, similar to what we have in Riga. So if that's helped us a lot You know, it's without so much regulation as what kind of project you will do, and the city must all the time follow that. But if an organization has a public benefit status, which we get from Ministry of Finance, and every year we account about that, and we also talk with the city and show what we do. But basically, if we have this status, then it automatically guarantees 90% tax reduction of property tax for the owner who is letting in some kind of social use in the building. So those were two little ideas that I thought might be useful for your discussion.
Maybe to put it on a, like very shortly, I think in Comuna, when we think about it, we say all the time the role of the regulator, of the public authority, should be, it's a difficult one because it's at the same time regulating and at the same time letting it be flexible enough to make sure that we're not suffocating with the new norms. So there's an equilibrium to find, there's a balance we need to look for. And I think for us there are three main things. One would be the public authority as a facilitator. So making sure that the buildings are used, that they make sure that their institutions, the social housing companies, that everybody is, it's easier for everyone to occupy these buildings. That would be one. Also to put budget there, because, I mean, that's also the joke. We need to take, in a way, it's great for everyone if the buildings are alive again, but then there are constructions to be done, insurance to pay, a lot of work to be done actually for a building which will be used only for 2 years or 3 years or 1 year and a half. So how do we get back on the investment? So we need public money there. If it's a public building, that's for sure. And sometimes the amounts are very low. And there's this idea that, oh, but you already get the building for free. And then you get a cave with no toilets, low electricity, and they want you to make something social, the smart city of tomorrow and the transition. And it's like... So I think there is really a responsibility. I think most people understand. It's not like 3 years ago would be crazy to ask for money to use a place. And I think slowly and slowly things are getting clearer. So that's the role of the facilitator, I believe. The second one would be to protect, and that's really important, that's key. So we talked about the public offers and making sure, as you said, that the project will not be judged on the price. So there is an empty buildings, who wants to take care of that buildings, and then two different organizations would come. One say, hey, I can do the smart city thing, I don't like that word, I can do the transition thing, I can do it with the neighbors, spend time with them to define the programmation. And the other one will say, hey, I'm opening a Dior thing. And so, but I don't ask money for that, of course, because you will pay with Dior three times a week, it will make a lot of money. So I think this is a criteria that should be taken away, and instead put, for instance, a certain price and ask what is the best project. That's another way to make it happen. And I think on the legislation based also, as you say, there's the AMI now, the arrêté de minime importance, we're working on the tax thing. And I mean, it's also not a revelation, right? Like now, I think they're working on it for a while. And now there's this question of this guichet d'occupation temporaire. So I think the public authority is really working on it, and we need to feed them with great ideas, also coming from all around the world. You're right, Marcitz, I think it's super relevant to say like, hey, in Riga we have this and this works, instead of reinventing here from scratch, like what would be a social temporary use? Okay, maybe it exists already elsewhere.
Yeah, well, I agree that there's like, it's really, I'm really happy to hear all of these things moving and then seeing that like on different levels and different aspects all over Europe, that is such a theme which we're also collectively thinking on. Another aspect that I wanted to add to the discussion is we don't have to fill all the temporary use. I think our society has this tendency to fill all the gaps and have everything in control and close everything. It still allows for other opportunities, and I think it's like, as you mentioned, as facilitating, it's more about a matchmaking between people who have great ideas or great projects, who are engaged to bring some sort of added value to their city or society, and matching them with like just spaces that are available, rather than necessarily looking to drag in people and so.
Just super short,
yes,
but key that I forgot to say that I think is important now that they're basically building up new policies. It's Like, basically, the question is about how to institutionalize that practice. That's the question. We don't like that word, but that's what we're talking about. And I mean, the question is, there's also many small stakeholders playing for a long time, or people with less means that cannot do it in a professional way, or small collectives doing directly amazing things for migrants, refugees, cooking food, leftovers, housing for homeless people, self-organizing, squats, like, and I think all of this, the risk by doing it, even a positive type of institution, is to vanish all that scene. And I think that's also something that should really be in mind when we're thinking about that. I don't have all the answers yet, like how we can do, but that's something we're also working on, and to imagine a way that everybody can really contribute within that 20th municipality.
And we have 4 more minutes before we open the question round. And I just want to ask one question that just comes up, and it's, where do you see your responsibility as creators of temporary space and temporary initiatives when it comes to sustainability? It's temporary, we say everything is temporary, it's okay, we agree on this, but this usually is transitory. You say you implicate your neighbors, the community and so on. What do you do? Are you implied in any way in the responsibility of the after?
Very interesting and relevant question. If I can start, I mean, the part that we are at Josaphat, for example, as a particular case, has been with the aim to be like, hello, we're here, and like we have an opinion and great ideas, we believe. And so it started more of like, hi, we're here, we exist. Where it now slowly goes to like, you know, we have like worked out this Chartre, this like manifest. Maybe if the day you once managed to launch your official open call for temporary use of Josaphat, which is in the pipeline, I think, for 4 years now, then maybe you want to take into account what we have experienced by now and what we value. It's also about like having a foot in the door and like, how is the development going now, and who are the players at stake, and can we maybe not talk to the developers that you're talking with to tell them of how we see it. It's basically really looking for this like communication of what we're doing and asking to be involved. And I think there the participation aspect is also really, really relevant and a hot topic in Brussels, because there is a lot of criticism on how this urban development movement that we're having with these 12 new big projects coming, and a lot of frustration about a lack of transparency and people just trying to first of all understand what is happening and then to be able to express themselves. And I think there I want to use this opportunity to also stress that participation should happen as soon as possible and not when the plans are already on the table. And I think therefore temporary use can be really relevant, because even before you know which program you want to put, you can have temporary use showing what could work, what fits in a neighborhood or what clashes, and to fail. And that it's okay in temporary use. That's not in urban planning.
Maybe I would like to start with the paradox. Like we say, nowadays participation is key. We need to participate. It's very important for you guys to participate. You will have time in a few minutes to participate. Everybody needs to give his opinion. And at the same time, what's more frightening for a developer to have the opinion of people on their project? So I think temporary use is right in between, because we want people to participate in the meantime. There's 2-3 years. What should we do together here? How do you like your neighborhood? How can we imagine an urban utopia? But then in 2 years, we will build a 5-star hotel. So like, and then that's an extreme example. Never happened to us to have to deal with that. But I think that's just to give an image on where do we want to put the frame of participation. And I totally agree with you. The question would be, if we want people to participate, let's be clear on what we want them to participate for. And if we can use temporary use super in advance and that we have no planning and say, okay, let's start with 3 years of like do whatever and see what happens. And from that to start to create something. And I'm not sure that's exactly the way it is right now. But that's another question. I think the responsibility there of the operator of the temporary use is a tricky question. Right?
And can I just add one? Like, I think it's also responsibility of the citizens to participate and not just to give your opinion and run away, but to be part of it, active part of it.
Talking about participation, I somehow, you know, we told basically, I feel this dynamic a bit that we are telling how we want to see the world and what temporary use is and why it's so good. But somehow I cannot help myself not noticing that kind of it's a bit like ganging up a bit on you. So I wanted to turn the table and ask, so we have this, you heard, I think many organizations have this vision how to use more vacancy in a social way. From your perspective now, participating, us together, us first of all, what do you need from temporary use organizers to privilege them more, maybe, than some market solutions? In what situations do you see that it's feasible? And what do you need from us? Not that, sorry guys, I just noticed that we are, this, that, and you are kind of starting to be in the defense. Wanted to break this.
Well, what we need, I think, is so I think one of the roles of the government, as you said, is the matchmaking between the available sites and buildings for temporary use and the needs of the organizations or the field. So I think the first thing we need from you is to have a good knowledge of what you do, how you want to do it, and what are the specific needs, and ideally what are the specific needs in specific neighborhoods. I think that's the first thing what we need, and then of course, but then I think we are repeating ourselves on this legislative thing. Is therefore we're really asking for your input. But there I wanted to maybe react on what you said, because I understood your last question more about sustainability, which we are now a little bit forgetting. And I think to go again in this legislative and minimum importance discussion, I think we have to dissociate 3 layers or 3 levels. And that's why I started to say that it's very important that we are conscious that everything is temporary and we don't have a clear definition where temporary use starts and where temporary use ends. And for instance, if we talk about fire regulation, it's not because something lasts 1 day or 1 week that we have to be less stringent on fire regulation. The risk in a temporary situation is the same risk as a risk in a permanent situation. Then there is everything which is sustainability and isolation norms, which are specifically in Brussels very strict. There I think it's very important that we come to some kind of clear definition. Okay, until 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, we consider something as temporary, and there we can be maybe a little bit less strict on some aspects, but still with the aim of keeping everybody conscious about the fact that actually we have to be sustainable. And then the third layer, and that's the layer I think where we can have the most creativity, or can be where we can write the most outside of the book. That's everything which is more related on land use and urbanistic rules. So my state secretary, my boss, he used to say in all the discussions we had over the last weeks that he's a lawyer, basically. So he says for him, rules are important, but if a project is better than the rules, the project should prevail over the rules. And I think specifically in temporary use, we can and we should have a little bit more liberty with this than in things which are more permanent. And then we can come back to participation and pre-configuration of sites. So I think there, and I don't think we have the right answer to it yet, but there we should see temporary use as something positive, which can a little bit cut through the traditional dynamics of someone who is proposing a project which is also derogating the rules, then everybody, the neighborhood, the politicians, who is attacking the project, yeah, because it's not respecting the rules. So if we can put this in more in the first phase of a project, within a temporary framework that everybody knows, okay, we are now testing a little bit, but don't worry, it's only for 1 week, 6 weeks, 6 months, 1 year. I think we can try to find some other dynamics in some situations. Not every situation will be capable for that, but in some situations I think we can find other dynamics.
Super, thank you very much. I would like to open this panel talk now to a collective discussion question moment. I don't know if do we have any extra microphones? Perfect, there's a microphone there. If anybody would like to say something, share something, ask something, do exactly that.
Thank you very much. Super interesting comments, sites, experiences. Really, really cool presentation. And thank you, Beaux-Arts, for doing it, because Brussels is special for the access it gives to this. I have 3 observations, very quick, and one question. Maxime, you mentioned Camelot, and I think I understand your opinion, being critical about them. I experienced it in 2011 in London as a young student going to London, and honestly, in a very positive way, because it offered a service that was a real alternative to private housing and super expensive housing. So I understand that Commune can see it as a competitor, but then it also has its role, it also offers a service. So maybe, I don't know, don't attack them frontally like this. Then about the Commune, I've heard many things. Today, I haven't heard one thing that, as an Italian in Brussels, is striking, and that's aesthetics. It's very interesting to discuss the economic role, how it can offer something. I see Brussels as being one of the places I've seen the most destroyed, where the historical architectural patrimony has been absolutely neglected. I spent quite a bit of time at CIVA, the architectural archive. And yeah, there they know it. They have the designs of some of the most beautiful buildings in Brussels that don't exist anymore. So when you criticize neoliberalism and speculation, maybe also leverage on the argument of aesthetics and how much has been destroyed for, I mean, yeah, look out of the window. I also live in Ixelles. There was the beautiful, okay, it's not Rome, but still, it was beautiful. The Saint-Vide building that now has been redeveloped into luxury apartments. I mean, I haven't seen few more ugly buildings recently than the one that they are about to finish. So that's the third. But then at the same time, I'm going to be also the devil's advocate in terms of the economic role that today, in today's economy, being realistic, the construction industry has. And I think something that the social innovation, the social experiments have to work on is, yes, you're offering something to the public, that's great. You offer something to individuals, that's fantastic. But being realistic in terms of how many jobs, how many salaries are paid, how much growth. I know it's a very delicate, I'm an economist in my background, but like we say, if Paris burns down, the GDP doubles, okay? That's a problem of our economic models, but it's also a reality. If we destroy and we rebuild, that's thousands of jobs, thousands of profits, and in a social initiative, you have to find an alternative to this. And then the last point, I found super fascinating the post-communist experience and the super neoliberalism. rather than a debate between economic ideals, can we say that it's something more cultural about greed rather than making the market the devil? Like it's more something that can be seen in more individuals, and some greedy individuals can make the mess. Thank you.
That was a question, the last one? Yeah. Okay, no, I think it's, you know, when you live in a certain context, you don't question some things, they become kind of, you know, given. For example, the fact that Europe has had 50 years more, 70 nearly years of continuous development of democracy and market mechanisms means that you're quite rich guys, you know, comparably. I realize it in micro situations all the time. I think in Eastern Europe it's rather that this is the basically second generation that's coming out of Soviet system where everybody was kind of poor and you had to be crooked to be richer. So there's this like, in Riga, or in Latvia in general, there was highest number of Bentleys per 1,000 or per 100,000 inhabitants in the world before the crisis. And crisis struck the strongest because we had the speculative growth, the highest one, higher. We were the fastest growing capital city in the European Union, Riga. But crisis struck also the most, more than Greece. Can you imagine? Have you heard that from Latvians? It was 28 or 27 point something % of GDP in first 2 years were like down. Okay, Greece had longer crisis, therefore it's maybe in total bigger, but in first years, like, so it's not about greed. I think it's just about conditions, how people live. But the extremes are interesting field because in extremes you get these new drives, new movements out of them. Like for example, also answering partly your comment, what value temporary use brings and social temporary use brings. We couldn't imagine Berlin or Amsterdam unless there were empty spaces in 90s that were inhabited by unmeasurable social experiences, and something was created out of that, you know. You wouldn't have these cities. It's like a substrate. I think vacant spaces are like substrate. You need to have them in the city, low-cost, accessible vacant spaces which can be remodeled for anything to be alive. It's like compost. Yeah.
Just a short word for this Camelot thing that I can't let go. Very briefly, very super briefly, cut me if you want. I mean, that would be terrible if Camelot was torturing every single individual, and it won't work, right? It's not because a service makes you as an individual happy that it's a service that we should encourage. I mean, probably lots of people here are flying with Ryanair. People here maybe order whatever. Yes, plenty of services are great for the users, and I believe Camelot is just one of them. And of course, they provide something great for you. Super happy, but I think we shouldn't consider it only through that paradigm, and that's why we absolutely want to provide an alternative to that.
And I think there again, the first question is like, how are the housing prices so freaking expensive that that is the best solution? And I think there is also a big difference in seeking long-term solutions, and temporary use doesn't sound like a good idea. It's still temporary use. It's about innovating towards more sustainable long-term uses. And then I might maybe pick up on the aesthetics questions. For me, actually, Brusselization has been the devil destroying the urban tissue of Brussels. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept. It is unique to Brussels that in the 60s and 70s, profit-driven development has actually destroyed major parts of our cities. Talking about the VTC, I think it's an iconic example of how a neighborhood, everyday environments of people have been just totally been erased to build Manhattan-inspired offices.
Which are empty now.
Which are empty.
And in temporary use by the developer themselves to build a new city.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to be very harsh. There's somebody with a microphone there. I would really like to hear what she's got to share or ask, because we have 3 more minutes left.
So I'd like to first thank you very much for this kind of state-of-the-art of temporary use in Brussels and in Riga. And picking on Max's point about not reinventing the wheel, I'm the person Marcis was referring to, and I would like to share with you some additional information that is publicly available to all of you, well, on the internet, and paper versions exist as well, which relate to many of the points and some points which were discussed today. So there was a network funded by the URBAC program, which is a European program. That's the network which brought together European cities so that they would exchange and learn from each other on temporary use. And so it's called the Refill network, like refilling something. So you Google Refill and URBAC, and on that you'll find some magazines with articles written by practitioners, municipalities and NGOs, for example, like Marcis. You have a very nice video about the win-win-win offer of temporary use that you can also use to promote it or to explain to people how useful it is. And there's also a roadmap to temporary use that we've developed where you can actually see where you are in terms of temporary use and what you need to develop next. And as just a few of the examples that we've shared and that you can find easily, it's, for example, the matchmaking that happened in Cluj in Romania, the whole Occupy Me campaign that is detailed by Marcis, and also you get all the details about the tax reduction. You'll get some insights from Ghent, the way they develop a temporary use fund to support projects, and also the specific regulation they have for short-term projects. You also have lots of interesting examples of what they do in Bremen in order to use temporary use for accommodating migrants. And you also have examples from, for example, Poznan, which develops specific rent for temporary use occupations. So all these are very concrete cases developed by the cities, also checklists, also the article Marcis was referring to about Everybody Says No in Nantes, and that's the name of the article. And you can get inspired, and actually you also get the contacts of all the people who worked on that and who are really struggling with that on a daily basis, and it was finished 2 years ago. So now they have also moved on, so you can benefit from the experience in your daily work.
Fantastic, thank you. Is there one last question?
So thank you very much again for the very nice panel discussions. I'm very curious about, in your vision, let's say for the next, I understand it's still a very open topic, but in your vision, what are the tools, the ways in which we can really create, let's say, participation of people? Because I think that's the main driver of this kind of activities. I mean, how do you see people participating into these spaces, into a fair way? Sorry.
It's okay. As this is the last question, I propose that we just do very brief. Each who wants to say something briefly, a reaction.
I can start. I think it was part of a discussion we had earlier this week on the side. It's a combination of need and vision. So there is a need for housing, a need for having an atelier space, a need for meeting each other without having to buy to drink. And there is also vision. What do we dream for our city, for our future? And I think we need both of these together in order to have people participate.
I think this participation thing is tricky. So again, it depends, what do we want to do? If your question is about the right to the city, it's to say like, to whom belongs the city? And then can we use temporary space as a first step into that direction? Then I believe that these spaces should be definitely run or at least thought with their neighbors. And that's a very concrete way to create participation. But then if the vision is the right to the city, which is something like a bit abstract, then it would be, can we really define it together? How far do we want to get there? And then we need the institutions also to be on board. And I don't think, I mean, temporary use is just a very little drop in the thing. And that's very important to say. There's a lot of responsibility nowadays on temporary use for gentrification, participation. And it's like, hey, I'm here for 2 years, I have €0. I'm working with a lot of volunteers also. People are dying on site, working their ass off for something that won't stay long. And so I think that's the way I would answer to that.
Thank you.
Well, actually, I have the same question, in the sense that it's something on which we want to work, but on which we, as I said, we don't have the answer yet. And that's why I think it's good that in the next weeks and months, we will have some meetings with some of the organizations here to develop this theme more.
This is a good question. What is participation? Really great question. I thought not to give some kind of stupid answer, stereotypic. I think participation is, so in normal economical world, you would rent a room, you would take a space, you would do whatever there is. Maybe you would meet neighbors sometimes, and maybe sometimes you would barbecue or something with them. I think for Free Riga, we define that people in our system, they pay what is 2 times less as a membership to the organization, but they invest their time in communal projects. Do something there, build something there, organize something there, cook something for others, somehow support the system, give tools, improve space to some other resident. I mean, to maximize time, which is not market-based somehow division, labor division. It's somehow, yeah, it's this other way of thinking which doesn't have such a strong way how to calculate it, you know, because euros are easy. Time for social, it's not so easy. So we're looking for how to maximize social time.
You can say it's expensive, not in euros, but it will be expensive because you will have to participate. That's the way to say it, I guess.
Yeah.
Can you explain?
That might not be the most beneficial thing for the other, for your priority, the euro. But for you who work for the government, you have multiple ministries, presumably, and one of them is anti-radicalization, one of them is education, one of them is tech or whatever. So if you get an investor who does like future programming training in your space, then that benefits you in another ministry. You just need to coordinate that, presumably. Yeah, I don't know.
If shortly to answer, it is quantifiable. I mean, we'll write in our contracts that people have to pay this membership, which is much less than the rent would be, and they have to contribute these hours every month. But you don't know where the hours will go, because that, you know, it's not like a business plan for a certain business model that you want to recreate. It cannot be like, we will do this exactly in the contract. The hours, the time that people spend doing something, they will go, oh, there's like ad hoc, this situation, this event being organized, oh, we'll restore these old wooden doors. It's like, in that sense, it's not so easy to measure. And when you try to measure it too much and regulate it too much, you kill creativity also.
Thank you very much. The time is come to say goodbye. Thank you very much to the speakers. Thank you. I realized that the 1 hour and a half with these 4 people is nothing, is a drop in the water, same as the temporary use question. We're at the beginning, there's still a lot to do, a lot to happen, a lot to learn. But we have to finish now because there's a next event in 15 minutes that you're all happily invited to, and it's a conversation between forensic architecture and Sea-Watch. If you want to, you can stay here. You're more than welcome. And otherwise, you can probably grab one of these on the way out and keep talking. Have a lovely evening.
We wanted to talk more with you, as you understood. Like, talk more with us.
It's